What is your calling? This is a question that probably on some level plagues just about every human on the planet. We may not say it that way. In the secular world, you'd more likely hear, what is your purpose, right? In the business world, you might hear, what is your why? But essentially, we're all asking the same thing. What is that thing that we were designed to do, that we were put here on earth to uniquely bring to the world? And using the word calling is just a biblical way, a Christian way of talking about the same thing. And I think it's that thing that we all kind of think of as the meaning of life. Calling is such a deep, deep topic. And it's one that I've wanted to touch on here for a while, but I really didn't know how to exactly. But God has really been working on me lately, trying to teach me how to study his word better. So I'm doing something totally different. I've been delving into the idea of doing a specific word study as I study the Bible. And I did that with the word calling this morning. And it kind of took me down a rabbit hole. I'm not going to lie. So this is very different from last week when I said, I've got no notes. I'm just going to talk to you from my experience. I will talk to you from my experience somewhat here, but this is mostly going to be me trying something new, me sharing with you what God was showing me this morning as I'm doing this word study. So I want to preface, like I've done in the past, by saying I am not a Bible scholar. I am not a pastor. Well, I'm not a Bible scholar any more than anybody that studies the Bible is a Bible scholar. My point is, I don't know the Bible backwards and forwards. I've read it, but I am not an expert by any means. I'm definitely not a pastor, and I don't want to be. What I want this to be is just kind of a way for me to share some of the insights that God is showing me, and I think might be helpful to you too, because if you're struggling with this idea of what is my calling or what is my purpose, well, maybe some of the things that I've learned and that I'm going to be sharing with you this morning will help with that. So I have a lot of notes. I'm going to be looking down a lot. I might even just pick up my laptop because it'll be easier. This is going to feel very different. It's not going to be polished. And I hope you like that because this kind of content, this kind of episode really excites me, if you can't tell. So, okay, let's just dive into this a little bit. So, like I said, I'm doing a word study, and that means going back to the Hebrew. Again, that is super intimidating, I know, because I don't know Hebrew. I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of this word anyway, but it's so important. And some of the best studies and sermons that I have heard, it's when they go back to those root words and really help us understand not only what the word is, but what it's truly meant to mean. Because, like I said, we tend to take these words and reappropriate them into our modern language. And so often we lose the point when we do that. And what I was seeing with the word calling is that we are totally doing that in some ways. In other ways, not so much. It's kind of similar to what it was intended to mean, but we have kind of turned it into what we want it to mean. I know I have. So that's what I want to talk about. So let's see. Like I said a minute ago, the more I'm studying this word, the more I'm realizing that the word we tend to equate with calling, purpose, is nowhere near enough, right? I think it's partly because we don't really truly understand what purpose means. Purpose itself is often used to just kind of mean passion, like the things that we're passionate about. And you'll see in a minute, but that's the idea, the concept that I'm going to be challenging the most here in this episode, because there was a long period of time where I looked at things that way. I thought about, if I'm trying to find my purpose, then, my purpose, my calling, I didn't call it calling at the time. I was calling it purpose. And, I always started with, okay, well, what are my passions? And one of those passions, has a deeper meaning. And so therefore it must be my purpose, right? That was kind of the logic. I don't know if that's just me, but that was kind of the logic that I followed to try to help me find my purpose. And one of the things that I learned this morning, which I'll share with you, is that I was going about that completely wrong in the first place. we are not meant to find our purpose. And I will explain that in a minute. But we're not. We're not meant to find our purpose or our calling at all. That's the part we're getting wrong. So let's just kind of go into this. The Hebrew word, pardon me if I mispronounce this or say it wrong or whatever, it's spelled Q-A-R-A, at least the way that I've found it. And it's like kara or chara, something like that. And its true meaning, like definition, is to call, summon, or proclaim. Okay? So those things are relatively similar. Proclaim kind of feels a little bit on the offside of that. So we're going to focus mostly on call and summon, because when we say calling and we talk about purpose, that's really more what we mean. And, this word, this Hebrew word, is used all throughout Scripture in a lot of the really famous Bible stories, right? We hear about it when we're talking about Moses. We hear about it with Abraham. We hear about it with Samuel. And, Moses is called to, as we know, go back to Egypt and lead the Israelites out of Egypt, out of slavery, basically. And the intention is for him to take them to Canaan, where they're supposed to then be able to build their nation and become, the nation of God, right? Obviously, they take a few turns along the way because of choices that the Israelites make, but that is Moses' calling, right? He is called very clearly, very audibly through a burning bush that many of us would be terrified of and at the same time kind of love, because it's hard to misunderstand that. He's called that way. Abraham is similarly called because he is the father of the nation of Israel. He is called to leave his homeland and go out into the world and basically become the nation of Israel. Samuel is called to be a prophet. So this is a little bit more of, I would think, probably more similar to what most of us are looking for, the type of calling we're expecting. Because obviously we're not expecting to go lead an entire nation, most of us. But Samuel is more of, this is like a vocation that we see. Not that I'm saying being a prophet is a vocation, but we see it that way sometimes. And so the idea of Samuel being called to be a prophet, that feels more relatable, I think, because, okay, am I called to be a singer? Am I called to be a business coach? Am I called to be, I don't know, an event planner? Honestly, it could be anything, but it's that vocation, or that like kind of identity, if that makes sense, like that title that we feel we're being called into. And that's what we're typically looking for, right? I mean, that's what I've always been looking for. So as I was looking into this, and specifically into those stories, but like you see this across the Bible, it's not just in these places. There are a few kind of key things that stood out to me in each of the instances in the Bible where this word chara is used. First and foremost, God calls these people by name. It's not a situation where he like puts out a blast and says, hey, I need somebody to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and to Canaan. Who's going to do that? Who's got that? You got that, Moses? Okay, cool. No, he specifically says, Moses, you are called to do this. You're the only person who can do it. I need you to go. But most importantly, he has uniquely designed Moses and his journey and his life to be the right person, right? Moses, having been somebody who, first off, shouldn't even be alive, and we're not going to go super far down this tangent, but like in reality, Moses shouldn't, I mean, he was born, but at a time when all of the Israelite babies, especially the boys, were being killed, right? He should have died immediately, but he didn't. Not only did he not die, he ended up being raised in Pharaoh's own home by his daughter. So he was raised in royalty. He had a direct connection to the Pharaoh. But he also was not a perfect human, right? He murders someone and then runs off in fear, right? He has this unique background to, not only see God's hand in his life and in his journey and the providence that allowed him to even exist in the first place, but, and this is me just kind of like side questing a little bit for a second, so bear with me, but his background as somebody who is so flawed, like we all are, but as a murderer, I think we can agree he's pretty flawed. that is a way that I think uniquely prepares him to be able to relate to and understand the Israelites and all of the stupid choices that they're about to make during all of this time in the desert. Granted, he gets just as frustrated with them and whatever, but he can understand the fear, and he can understand the doubt and the things that cause them to disobey and to stray from God, even though God is basically physically present with them and they can see his hand guiding them. I think Moses is uniquely designed, and his journey uniquely prepared him to be a good leader for them, because he can understand, but he's also learned from his past mistakes, right? So it's just kind of one example here, but he was clearly specifically chosen. They were all called by name. They are the uniquely designed person to fill that role, whatever it is. The second thing that came to my attention here is that a calling is not just, well, see, we think of a calling as a task, a mission, an assignment, if you will. And it is, but it doesn't start with that. It starts with relationship, right? It's an invitation into relationship, because what does God tell all of these people? We'll go back to Moses again, because he's one that is pretty well known. He is told, even when he's doubting and pushing back on God's calling and saying, oh, I can't do it, it's, send somebody else, blah, blah, blah. What does God tell him consistently throughout that conversation? He says, I will be with you. I'm not asking you to go and do this on your own. I will be with you. And that's the most important part. That is the invitation to step into a journey alongside God. And we're going to touch further into that in a minute, but that is the core, really, of what God is asking him to do. He's not saying, first off, he's not laying out a step-by-step plan of everything to him by a long shot, right? He's basically just saying, okay, go, I need you to go to Egypt. This is the first thing you're going to do. You're going to go to Egypt and you're going to free my people. Now, granted, many steps involved in that, but that's the first thing he's supposed to do. And, he doesn't know how everything is going to play out. He doesn't know that they're going to be spending all this time in the desert. He doesn't know that the Red Sea is going to part for them. He doesn't know any of this. He only knows the first step. But most importantly, he knows that God is going with him and that God will be with him throughout this entire journey. And that's the most important thing. And we have that same promise. And I think that's part that I have a tendency to forget a lot of the time when I feel a calling that feels too big for me. And we'll get to that again too, but when we feel those things that feel too massive, God will be with us. That's the whole point. This is an opportunity to really step into such a deeper relationship with him. And that's the part that can excite us the most, even though we're afraid of the things that we're being asked to do along the way. The most important things that I've noticed throughout all of this is that it's not about us. Your calling, your purpose, if you want to use that word, it's not about you. It's not about your purpose. It's about God's purpose for your life. And the most important thing is that he will be with you through it all. And most importantly, that relationship comes before any of the tasks that are put in our path, any of the things that we are being asked to do. So there are two different types of calling. We see this clearly in the Bible, and we can see this in our own lives. There's the first or primary calling, which is more universal, and that is the one that everybody has, and we all have the same universal calling. This is to follow Jesus and to strive every day to be more like him. That is the universal calling for all who believe in God, right? But then there's that second calling, and this is the one that we're talking about most here, and this is an individual calling. This is that unique to us, the thing that we were created to do, the way we are meant to shine his light in the world. That is our individual calling, and that's usually what we're referring to. But the most important thing is that we need to recognize that without understanding and pursuit of the first calling, there is no second calling, right? We're so focused on our purpose and what am I supposed to be doing here on earth and whatever. And the point is that first one, if that was the only calling we had, it would be enough. The second calling is honestly a blessing and a privilege for us to be able to partner with God and be used to better the world, to have some sort of impact. He doesn't have to give us a secondary, individual calling. That first calling that we all have is more than enough. And honestly, is hard enough on its own. So if we breeze past that part and focus solely on the second part, well, then we're missing the whole point. Not that our individual calling isn't important or that it isn't exciting or worthy of our pursuit. Of course it is. How we shine his light to other people is absolutely important, right? If we aren't following our calling and shining his light into the world, then we are potentially preventing other people from even knowing about their first calling, let alone pursuing it. So absolutely, it's important. And, I don't believe that we have just one calling in our entire lives. I think there are, there's like that calling that is, like we've been talking about, like that role that we fill, that way that we are meant to impact the world, whatever that looks like. And I don't think that we just have one secondary calling. I think different seasons in our lives are going to produce different callings. And I think, sometimes a calling is connected to another one. We don't even know it, right? It might be putting us into position for the next thing that we're meant to be doing and all of that. It might just be a step along the way. We don't know. And we probably won't have all of those answers on this side of eternity. But, I think those callings are super important. And if you feel like you are following a calling right now, I would love to know what it is. So let me know in the comments and let me know, how did you know? We're going to talk a little bit more about like ways that God shows us our callings and stuff like that. But I'm curious how you knew that you were being called to something specific. So yeah, let me know that in the comments because I'm really excited to see how God is working in and through you as well. And I will share a couple of mine along the way during this episode as well. But I'm doing this study right now on Ezra. I fully expected this episode to be a totally different topic, all based on Ezra. God had different plans. So Ezra is still going to be a part of the conversation here because if you don't know the story of Ezra, you're in good company because it's one of those books of the Bible that I have a tendency to forget is there, which is unfortunate because it's actually pretty insightful when you really dig into it. We're not going to dig really, really deep into it, but I'm going to be using this study. So I've told you guys before, I love the Proverbs 31 Ministries. I love their First 5 app. They do a lot of great studies. I know I've referenced them many times here on the podcast. And this is one in particular, Ezra and Nehemiah. We're still actually even in the middle of it. But the Ezra side of it impacted me so much that I bought the study guide because I really wanted to dive deeper. And this is part of what got me going down this rabbit hole of talking about callings, because the whole like setup for the study is talking about that. Because Ezra, just high level, paraphrase here, he was a scribe who was part of the Israelites when they were in Babylon. They had been basically conquered and living in exile in Babylon for, I want to say it's like 50 years, something like that. And he was chosen to be the one to go back with the Israelites when they were released by the Persian king to go and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And I'm going to touch on some of these things throughout a little bit because that kind of stuff becomes important as we talk about like different ways that God shows us that he's calling us. But so I want to pull this up. So one of the things they said in this study, they were giving like 6 different examples, methods, ways, I guess, that we might recognize a calling in our lives. So before you answer the question or maybe after, the question that I asked a couple minutes ago about how did you know that you were being called to what you're pursuing right now, that purpose that you're pursuing, you may find your answer in one of these. I did. And so I'm going to give you some examples from my own life of these right now. But there are 6 different methods here. The first one being stirred in the spirit. And this is kind of like that excitement. This is when you feel super inspired and you get an idea and like you kind of can't stop thinking about it. You can't stop talking about it. You're just like dreaming about it at night. Those things that God puts into your heart and inspires you for, and that inspiration just keeps flowing, right? You're just so excited about it. That is one method. Does that mean that every time we're excited about an idea that it's a calling? No. And that's where things get a little bit confusing and tricky, but that is one way that he might do that. Second one is being guided by God's hand. We see this one really, really clearly in Ezra because, like I said, the Israelites were in Babylon. They had been conquered. This was a punishment for them as a nation, stepping away from God and worshiping false idols and things like that. And so he allowed them to be conquered. They were living in exile, meaning they couldn't go back to their homeland for like 50 years. And then I could be wrong about this, but I think what happens then is that the Persian Empire conquers Babylon or something along those lines. And so now the kings of Persia are in authority over the Israelites. And we see King Cyrus. This is the first of many times when different kings become involved in this process, but he's the first one. King Cyrus, threw the doors wide open for the Israelites. And not just for them to be able to leave and go back to Jerusalem, but to rebuild the temple that Babylon had destroyed, right? He not only allows them to, he gives them supplies. He takes a lot of the silver and gold and things that, the Babylonian Empire had stolen from them and gives it back to them. He, basically says that anything that they need, whether it's the animals for the sacrifices or money or materials and things like that in order to rebuild the temple, they can take it directly out of the king's own storehouses, right? He is giving it to them. Obviously, a pagan king would not do this on his own. This is obviously a situation where God is guiding the path. He is working through this king to show the Israelites this is the next step for you, right? So it's a calling for the whole nation, but specifically for Ezra in that he is meant to lead them in this. So I have an example of this one in my own life. I'll get to that in a second because I want to go through this list first, but I will get back to that in a second. Another way is by being led by God's word. And so when we are regularly spending time studying the Bible and really digging in, not just reading a devotional every morning, but really diving deep and trying to understand kind of what I'm trying to do right now, study a specific word and look at what is that supposed to really mean? And am I misinterpreting it? Am I using it incorrectly? Things like that. God speaks to us through his word in that way. Another way he might maybe show us our calling or simply encourage us in our calling is being encouraged in community. I kind of look at this similarly to the idea of affirmation. And I don't mean affirmations little phrases that you write for yourself to help you stay focused and grounded and things like that. I mean, that's a different kind of affirmation. This is a biblical style of affirmation. This is something that tends to happen, at least in my experience, when somebody who has no idea what God might be telling you to do, what you might be trying to decide or trying to figure out, and something that they say to you gives you guidance, right? Or gives you confirmation or encouragement that you should pursue that thing or you should go that way or you should, whatever it might be. I don't think it necessarily has to be that they don't know what you're trying to decide, but I think it's most powerful when they don't, when they just happen to tell you something that you needed to hear and they didn't know at all what you were wrestling with or anything like that. I think that's a really, really powerful method of God calling and, us just really hearing God's voice in our lives. The fifth one is being burdened to pray. And this is a situation that comes from either a spiritual burden, maybe you are, in the context here, they're talking about this is the Nehemiah half of the study. They're talking about when Nehemiah hears that, he's stayed back in Persia and he hears that there's continued opposition and destruction in Jerusalem. And he is just so burdened by this. He weeps and he prays and he feels like God is calling him to get involved and to do something about it. And that is a version of that. That's an external thing, but I think this can also come from, specific situations in our own journeys, in our own stories, maybe a specific illness that you go through or a tragedy that you experience in your life that might burden you to pray so heavily that God, uses that to call you into a specific area of people maybe that you're meant to serve, or a story that you're meant to tell. I mean, there's so many different ways. And so we'll talk about that again in a minute. And then the last one is being humbled in heart. And I think this is kind of similar to, we hear people say sometimes, God put it on my heart to say this, or God put it on my heart to do this. And I think this is kind of an example of that. These are, I would assume, kind of typically smaller words from God, smaller callings, not meaning smaller, like less important, but maybe not necessarily taking you on like a whole new life journey. It might just be a calling to, help somebody out in a certain way, a calling to donate money to something, or a calling to show up for someone in a way that they absolutely don't expect, especially from you maybe. And so I think those are a little bit different, and those require us remaining open and keeping a humble heart when we go before God, whether it's in prayer or worship or reading the Bible, just to be open to what he might be trying to tug at our heart to say. And I think that's kind of it, the tug at our heart, that feeling that we get. I talked about this, I don't know, I can't remember when, a couple weeks ago or maybe last week, that like pulling, that leading that we sometimes feel. I think that's what humble in heart really is referring to, that feeling. So there, like I've hinted that there are a couple of specific stories in my own life where I feel like God has called me very clearly. And looking back in this context, I can see, kind of which of these methods of calling he actually used in my life. So the first one is just moving to Idaho. So you may or may not know, I live in Idaho. I did not grow up here. I grew up in California. And my husband and I, like, we knew that we didn't want to stay in California. We weren't meant to stay in California for various reasons. And we didn't know where we were supposed to go. There were a couple of places that we looked at. There were, pros and cons to everywhere. Idaho being one of those places, but a place that he had never even visited, and that I had been to once as a child, like a totally different part of the state than where we ended up. And so, this was something we had just kind of started talking about. And there are so many little God moments in this. I'll try to pick out just a couple so that this doesn't go on too long. But it became so incredibly clear to me that God was calling us not just to leave California, but specifically to come here. And it was a big deal for me because having lived, I guess what would it be, like 40 years at that point in one place. I mean, literally within, 50 miles of the place where I grew up. It's a big deal to move to a totally different state, right? And to completely change your environment. We didn't know anybody when we were coming here. So that's a big move. And I don't know if it would have been as easy for me to step out in faith in that way had he not made it so clear by opening so many doors. So the first door that he opened was COVID, honestly. And I say that not in any way to lighten the, severity of what COVID meant to our world and how many people were impacted by it. Many people I know were specifically impacted by it in a lot of different and tragic ways. But for us, it was a part of the puzzle, a part of the way that God was opening doors for us, because it opened the possibility of me being able to keep my job and not have to stay in California, which, as you guys all know, that would have been pretty unheard of prior to that. So that was the first step. That was kind of the cracking of the door, making it a thought that we were actually really starting to think about. Jump forward a couple of steps and, we decided to come up here and visit. Primarily just to say we'd been here before we moved here, but also just to kind of get an idea of some of the neighborhoods. We knew we were going to be buying a house probably kind of sight unseen. And so, we thought, okay, well, let's go up there. We'll, check out a couple of different neighborhoods and see what part of town we want to be in, maybe tour some houses so we can get, a feel for things, just so that we don't feel like we're going in quite as blind, right? So we had just started thinking about doing this and getting ready to plan a trip. And we were at church one Sunday in Burbank, and I went onto the app because we have just like most churches, we use the Church Center app, which is a way to interact with all kinds of things. And one of those things is tithing. and giving. And so I went into the app to tithe for the week, and our church has multiple campuses. So when you go in there, you put in the amount that you're going to tithe, and then you scroll through like a list of campuses. At that point, had all been in California, that you can select your campus to make sure that your tithe goes to your campus. And I'm scrolling through, and suddenly I see the word Idaho in the list. And I was like, okay, that wasn't there last week. So I reached out to our pastor's wife, and I was like, talk to me about this. Why does it say Idaho? And she said, oh, we're opening our first campus outside of California. We're opening a campus in Idaho. And I said, what? Like, how crazy is that, right? We're just starting to decide that we think Idaho's the way we're meant to go. And here's another breadcrumb from God along the way. And we're like, wow, that's really cool. Well, okay, so yeah, maybe that's a confirmation. That feels like an affirmation that we're going in the right direction. So we get so excited. We plan our trip to come up here. I think we came up in like October, maybe, or like end of September. I can't even remember now. But we have it set. We're going to come up here. And so I immediately started following on Facebook, the pastor who was going to be planting the Idaho campus. Because, I want to start to kind of like get to know him a little bit, like see if maybe that's a church we're going to want to go to when we move here and all that stuff. And I see that the Sunday that we're going to be in town is going to be their first in-person service. Now, they've been meeting virtually because of COVID, because they were meant to plant the church like a year prior, and then COVID happened and whatever. And so, yeah, so they had not had an in-person service yet, and they were going to have it that weekend that we were going to be here. Nuts. So we came up, we were like, yeah, we're going to go. Let's check out that service in person. We'll meet the pastor and all this kind of stuff. We went, we met them. It was fantastic. We ended up getting to go out to lunch the next day, I think it was, with the pastor and his wife. They're amazing people. You guys might meet them someday, because I'm thinking about maybe having both of them on the podcast at some point. But we had such a similar background and journey to them. The connection that we felt with them, that I specifically felt with them, was undeniable. And just all of these different things falling into place. There were a lot of things, I'm not going to go into so much detail, but there were a lot of things with real estate, with selling our condo and buying up here, things where it all could have gotten derailed in a heartbeat, and yet God pulled through. And not only did it work out, but it actually ended up working out more in our favor than we expected. I mean, just everything about it. God just kept laying those flagstones, as it were. That's what I'm picturing right now. That's why I'm doing that with my hands. He just kept laying that out in front of us. It's almost like I can visually see him showing us and like revealing the next step we were meant to take with every interaction, with every circumstance that came along, which is crazy, but like very similar to Ezra with King Cyrus allowing them to leave, and then like literally funding their journey and, taking care of, or not so much taking care of, but like decreeing to the opposition that they ended up facing when they got back to Jerusalem, like, no, basically I told them to do this, so back off, right? Like all along the way, he's doing the same thing. God is letting the next step be revealed to them so that they can walk on it, right? So they can step on it. So that is, for me, clearly an example of being guided by God's hand. I cannot think of a more clear example. And so much has changed in my life and in my business and my ministry, if I'm even going to call it that, because it feels a little bit overwhelming to call it that. But because I moved here, I can absolutely see how moving here was a vital, vital part of that process. So that's one example that kind of leads into another that I just kind of hinted at, which is focusing more on my faith in my business, on the channel, in my podcast, all of that kind of stuff. That is a stirred in spirit. That is an idea that he gave me that I couldn't shake, that he inspired, that I was excited about, that I am excited about, and that I'm still trying to figure out. And that's why you've seen so much variation from me here as I'm doing this, because I'm not quite sure yet what it's supposed to look like. But I'm so excited about it that even in the face of opposition and doubt and discouragement and all of these things, I am still so excited to keep pursuing that. And that is another way that I see God's calling, and this is part of what we've seen in Ezra and from this study guide. And then the last one, I'm not going to go into details here because if I'm honest, I'm just not quite ready to yet. It's more personal and it's scary. It's more of a Moses calling, if I were to call it that. It's a situation where it is so clear to me, God might as well be speaking audibly through a burning bush. Like, I know he's telling me to do it, and I'm doing it as best I can, slowly. I'm fighting it, and I'm trying not to. So this is part of why you're seeing a lot of change that you're going to be seeing here continually on the channel, because I'm trying to make space. Like we were talking about last month with finding that balance and sometimes needing to let go of certain things that are good in order to make room for something bigger, better, more impactful, more meaningful that God is trying to bring into our lives. That is something that I'm going through right now, which is why I was so passionate about that topic last month. Because, yeah, it's something that he wants me to do. And this is something that I have been many times encouraged by community, some who know that they're encouraging it specifically, and some who have no idea, but who have been encouraging it simply with their words and the things that they have said to me. Absolutely burdened to pray. This is based on, my own journey and some things that I have gone through in the past that have been very difficult and that have often driven me to my knees in prayer and tears and all of that. And I know that it's there for a purpose. And I'm not going to get emotional right now because I refuse to, but I know that. I know that's what it's there for. And so I'm pursuing that. And it's also led by God's word, because the more that I read things like Ezra and the more that I read Moses and, see all of this, the more that I can see that, yes, God is calling me to this. There's a verse in Romans. There's one that a lot of people know, Romans 8:28, that is really well known. But I actually want to read Romans 8:29 and 30 with an emphasis on 30, because this is the part that I think is kind of key here. I normally read in the NLT, but I'm going to be reading this in the NIV because I think the wording is a little more clear to what we're actually talking about here. But it says, "For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters." Now here's 30. This is the part that's really, really key. "And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified." Why is that important? When we're talking about calling and justification and glorification, I think what he's saying here, he's saying a few different things, but what I'm really, really getting from this is when we feel that imposter syndrome, when we are called to something, especially when we're called to something big, and we do not feel capable or prepared or ready, whatever it might be, which is how I'm feeling about this last thing that I was talking about. When we feel that way, it's easy for us to push it aside and just assume, well, obviously I'm not the right person to do that. I can't do that, right? This is what Moses said. I can't do that. I'm not a good speaker, even though, side note, he is literally lauded as being a good speaker earlier in the Bible. So we know that's not really true. That's just his perception that he is not a good enough speaker to go before Pharaoh and, basically demand that he let the Israelites go. These are all his doubts that we see. And same kind of thing with us most of the time. It's not circumstantial that we feel like we can't do something. It's because we don't believe we're good enough. We don't believe we're capable. And there's a phrase that my husband says often. It's I don't know the whole story, but I know there was when he was working at a camp, a Christian camp, when he was much, much younger. He was a counselor. Ironically, I worked there as well, the year later. Crazy. But anyways, there was a camp counselor there who said this phrase to him, and it has stuck with him so much so that he has told this story many, many times, and I've heard it many times, and it's completely relatable here. It's that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And what this means is that he's not choosing us. He's not calling us because we are 100% prepared and capable of doing this on our own. This is what goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that relationship is the most important part of a calling. God saying, I will be with you. We need him. He's not saying this is something we can do on our own. He doesn't want us to do it on our own. He wants to do it with us. It's a journey we're meant to take together. He will give us, he's already created us with the general skill set, the general talents that are needed for this particular role, the specific journey, whatever it might be. He has already uniquely designed us to be the right person for this, but he also knows that we're going to have a hard time believing that and trusting that. And he will be there alongside us every step of the way to continue to fill in the gaps that we perceive in our own capabilities, right? He will give us what we need in order to fulfill the calling that he is putting in front of us. This takes me back to the Ezra study guide. I'm going to read a little paragraph that they have in here because I think that it can be a challenge, just like we all struggle with knowing if we're hearing God's voice or if it's just our own desires that we're attributing to God, or if it might even be something nefarious and evil trying to take us down a bad path. In this same kind of way, how do we know if a specific calling is from God? So I just want to read what they wrote here because I really, really like this. It says, how do we know if a secondary calling is from God? Remembering that the secondary calling is the individual one. So we're not talking about following Jesus and striving to be like Jesus. That is obviously from God. Everyone has that calling. This is those individual things. So how do we know? We focus on whether it aligns with the primary calling, what we were just talking about. We pursue God and learn his voice. We renew our minds by studying his word. We pray about everything. We learn to recognize fear and put it aside. And we take one step forward in faith over and over again. That is God's calling for our lives, to walk the journey with him. That relationship is everything. So when we face opposition, when the next step forward feels like we're going backwards or maybe like we're just walking into the fire, it's all about keeping our eyes on Jesus. Who we are called to be, that universal calling, that comes first. That's rooted in relationship with God. It's rooted in identity. It's rooted in our very existence. But our individual calling, that comes second. That comes out of the first calling. Without the first calling, there is no second calling. And this is the assignment, the mission, the specific direction that we are sent in. Here's the last thing that I want to bring up here. And if you don't hear or remember anything else that I said in this whole episode, please remember this part, because this is the part that I think is so key to helping us to understand really and truly what calling / purpose / why, whatever you want to call it, what it really is and how we've been maybe getting it wrong, how I've definitely been getting it wrong. A true calling from God is just that. It's initiated by God. It is not self-discovered. We are not meant to find our purpose. We're not meant to discover our purpose. Does that mean that we're not supposed to seek it? No. But how we're supposed to seek it is by following Jesus, by reading the Bible, by praying, by worship, not by trying to figure out what we're good at and what we enjoy and, ways that we can most help other people. Not that any of those things are bad. They're just not a calling, right? Secondly, and we've said this a bunch of times, but that a calling is relational before functional. So the specifics of what we're called to do don't matter nearly as much as the fact that we are partnering with God in that mission and that we are side by side with him. The example, again, being Moses, and that God is telling him, I will be with you. This next one, I think, is so incredibly key, and that is that it interrupts our normal life. So often we kind of make the things that we actually want to do, we make our desires into a purpose. We find a way to like make it seem more important and more meaningful. And this must be my purpose, right? Because I care about it so much and because it's, it's good for the world and it's, a godly desire and all of that. And that all might be true. But a true calling is a redirect. A true calling is an interruption. It is not a path that we are already on. When we moved to Idaho, that was clearly a redirection. That was clearly a calling because we lived in California. Did we want to move somewhere else? Yeah, there were inklings of that. But the choice to leave when we did, we left pretty quickly after we started even really, truly thinking about it. And it was an absolute interruption of our lives because total different community, leaving our families, leaving all of this stuff, everything about it was an interruption to our normal life. Same thing in a smaller way with me focusing more on faith in my business. I was going down a totally different path with my TSA Weekly podcast. I liked what I was doing there, but completely different. It was an interruption of the path I was on. I had to stop doing that in order to do this, right? So that's a redirect. That's an interruption. And this other thing that I'm not going to get into the specifics of is absolutely an interruption, but you'll just have to take my word for that for now. The next thing is that it requires a response. A calling is not complete until we respond to it, until we take that first step. Otherwise, it's just God knocking over and over at the door and calling and calling and calling, but it is not completed until we take action, until we respond. And then the last thing, and this is the one that none of us ever want to think about, but it comes with a cost. A calling is most likely going to be the most wonderful thing that you ever experience in your life when you truly follow that calling and walk hand in hand with God in it. But at the same time, it's going to require sacrifice of something. And that's the part that we like to ignore. But if you're taking yourself down a specific path and considering that your purpose, your calling, and it doesn't come with some cost, some sacrifice, then I don't want to be so absolute about this because, like I said, I am not an expert in any of this, but just based on this and looking at the examples of Moses and Abraham and just all the people in the Bible who the cost is very clear, right, for them, whether it's potential cost or just the very clear cost of obeying God and following that calling. If there is no cost, is it really a calling or is it us just simply doing what we want to do and making it mean more than it's supposed to? It's just a question I kind of want to leave us with because I feel like if we get all of this out of order and if we're so busy chasing what we're supposed to be doing rather than who we are meant to be, who we are becoming, which is a child of God, right? As a follower of Jesus. If we're so focused on the what instead of the who, we're missing the whole point. The Bible very clearly tells us God calls us to relationship first. And if it ended there, it would be enough. But then he goes even farther and he invites us to partner with him in a specific assignment. So this was long, guys. I'm not going to lie. This was very long. I don't expect to do a whole lot of editing on it. This is breaking all of the cardinal YouTube rules about optimizing videos and all of that. And, I don't know, but this is absolutely what God told me to do this morning. I mentioned very early on in this episode that I had a plan for a specific episode about Ezra. I had a total outline planned out and all this stuff, and I threw it all out the window. Not because any of it isn't worth talking about, and so maybe I'll come and talk about some of it in the future, but it just was not what I was supposed to talk about today. So let me know, please, because this kind of feedback will be so helpful for me. Do you like this kind of episode? Was this interesting? Was this insightful? Was this helpful? Or was this just way too long? You skipped through it all. You put it on 2x just to get through it if you're being kind. I don't know. Just let me know. I'm curious because I felt very passionate about this episode. I think that you could probably feel that through the camera, that I'm very interested in this topic, and I kind of love this kind of study. It's really, really interesting to me, completely fascinating. And so I would love to do this a little bit more often. But it will probably mean that the episodes come less frequently, because this level of depth in content is not something I can do on a weekly basis. So it might shift how I do things here a little bit on the podcast. So yeah, just let me know your thoughts, your feedback in the comments here. And I hope also that you do go into the comments and let me know what is your calling? Are you pursuing a calling right now that you are super excited about? What is it? And now that you know these 6 different methods that God uses to call us to different things, not that they're the only ways, but 6 very clear ways that we see throughout the Bible, which one resonates most with your story? Tell me your story in the comments. Thanks for watching this episode all the way to the end, and I hope that you liked it, and more importantly, that you found it helpful. If you did, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with another Christian business owner that you know is going to love it as much as you did. God bless you.